Hello and welcome to the Apostolic Resource Center. This is Lisa Great. I am so honored to be able to join you again today. This is day 3 of our prophetic journey into the Promised Land. And it has been a journey already to acknowledge what the Lord is revealing through the book of Joshua. The reason it's a prophetic journey is because we are seeing the prophetic, meaning the upcoming potential situations that will arise for us as we move in this promised land that God has brought the church into. Now, I'm not giving a timeline as to when these things are going to happen. I felt like the Lord was just giving a prophetic insight into some things that are going to be potential things that will happen. And prophetically, I believe some things are definitely going to happen. I just don't know when. And I love Johnny Enlow because he really, when he pastors the prophetic, he gives you such great insight into understanding prophecy and prophetic people. And he said that if a prophet gets a strong what, they probably have a weak when. But if a prophet gets a strong when, they probably have a weak what. And the reason is because if God gives you the what and the when, then you don't need the faith to walk this out. There's no mystery in it. And mystery is actually what allows our faith to expand and to grow. And so the Lord has been consistently over the years given me a strong what. And until Johnny Enlow taught me that, I used to wrestle with the when. Like I have a hip problem. Remember Jacob? He wrestled with God and his hip was taken out of socket. I would wrestle the word when down. God, when, oh God? How long, oh God? When? Because I knew the what. I just didn't know the when. But now, ever since Johnny Enlow said that, I have found myself at such peace in just knowing the what or in just knowing the when. And so I'm going to give you a prophetic journey into the promised land, but I'm only going to be giving you the what. The when is going to be visible. It's going to manifest throughout the prophetic journey into the promised land, but I'm going to definitely tell you what we're supposed to look for based on what the Lord has been showing me through the book of Joshua. So today, yesterday was a little bit of a, if you didn't watch yesterday's, you need to go back and watch that because we walked through the valley of trouble yesterday and we actually recognized a corporate sin that I don't recall personally. Others probably do, but I don't recall a national sin that has been repented of, especially in the church. So I just want you to go back and look at that if you want to follow us systematically on this prophetic journey into the promised land. So today we are going to look at Joshua chapter 9. This is a prophetic journey into the promised land. And if our promised land journey is going to pattern at all Israel's, and I believe it could because we're living with Joshua as our leaders now, and new situations are arising. We are going to take our next look at Joshua chapter 9, and I'm titling this, Beware of the Gibeonites. Beware of the spirit of the Gibeonites. Now, the Gibeonites were an actual people back in the days of the Israelite promised land situation. And here's what happened. There was a coalition of 5 kings that came together, and they were going to attack Joshua and Israel head on. Now, the Gibeonites had heard that this is what this coalition of 5 kings were going to do with their armies, but instead of joining their coalition, the Gibeonites created a ruse. And so they chose a ruse over a direct attack because they had known the history of Israel. They had heard about the Red Sea crossing. They had heard about the Jordan River crossing. They had heard about the kings of Og and Bashan. Og and Sihon that Israel had defeated under Moses. They had heard about the walls of Jericho that had fell. I mean, they were fully aware of the history of God and Israel and the many victories that they went through. And so the Gibeonites are like, direct attack, I don't care how many people you put together, is never going to work with the Israelites. So they went with a ruse. And it was a deception that literally hooked Israel and its leaders. And here's what it says in Joshua chapter 9. And we must beware of the spirit of the Gibeonites, because I know it's a promised land spirit that we are going to run into, and we must be aware of it. We must watch for it in our personal lives. We must watch for it in our churches, and we must watch for it in our nation, because it's a spirit of the Gibeonites and it's rooted in deception. Therefore, the source of the voice is going to be Satan, not God, and we're going to want to steer clear away from it, and definitely not do what Israel did, because they made a treaty with it. That's very troublesome. So here's what it says. It says that in we're in Joshua chapter 9, we're looking at verse 4. It says, the Gibeonites learned how Joshua had destroyed Jericho and Ai, so they resorted to a ruse. They sent a delegation disguised as messengers from a distant land. They loaded their donkeys with worn-out sacks and old patched wineskins. They wore old patched sandals on their feet and old tattered clothes, and took along dry, moldy bread. When they arrived at Israel's camp at Gilgal, they said to Joshua and the Israelites, "We've come from a far country to propose that you make a treaty with us." They had deceived with the evidence that they brought with: old bread, old wineskins, old garments, old sandals. This is going to have a New Testament application for you that have ears to hear. You're already jumping ahead with me. But they also came with a message: we want to make a treaty with you. We've come from a distant country. We've heard all about your victories. We don't want to fight with you. We want to join you. And this is the part that is we need to be aware of. Okay? Look at verse 13 or verse 12 of Joshua 9. "Look at our bread," the Gibeonites said. "It was still warm when we left home with it. See how dry and moldy it's become. These wineskins were new when we filled them. See how they've dried up and burst. And look, our clothes and sandals are worn out from our long journey." The leaders of Israel ratified a peace treaty with the Gibeonites by sharing a meal together, but they failed to consult with Yahweh. Joshua agreed to let them live. He made a peace treaty with the Gibeonites, and the leaders of the assembly of Israel sealed it with an oath. But 3 days after the treaty had been made, the Israelites learned that they had been deceived. The spirit of the Gibeonites is a spirit of deception. It is a spirit of old wine, old sandals, old bread. I know for you that have ears to hear, it's Mark 2:22. How can you put new wine into old wineskins? God was pouring out new wine upon Israel. They were under a new leader in a new land with new war tactics. They had just walked through the valley of trouble and saw the door of hope. Despite Achan's sin, they repented nationally of withholding the first fruits, of withholding the dedicated, devoted things to God. And now here they move along. They're headed into the next situation, and they encounter the spirit of the Gibeonites. And they become deceived because they tasted the bread. They looked at the wineskins. They saw the sandals, but they did not consult Yahweh. So they made a treaty with the old. even though they were standing in the new. They made a treaty with the old, even though they were standing in the new. Beware of the spirit of the Gibeonites. My friends, Jesus said in Mark 2:22, you do not put new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the skins will burst. This says these wineskins were new when we filled them. See how they've dried up and burst. They were letting them know we are of an old system. We are of the land you're trying to take over, and we don't want to be displaced. In Mark 2, where Jesus gave that famous statement not to put new wine into old wineskins, or to take a new garment or a new patch and put it on an old garment, or to put a patch on a new garment because it'll rip. Wine and clothes, the exact same thing in the Gibeonite story in Joshua 9. The context that Jesus was discussing was when the Pharisees were talking to John's disciples about not fasting, like the disciples of the Pharisees were fasting. And Jesus said, here's the deal. My disciples don't fast because I'm the bridegroom and I'm sitting here with them. It's not a time for old wineskins, for old wine, for old bread, for old sandals, for old clothes. Jesus Christ was on the scene and he was declaring everything was brand new. Remember, Joshua in Hebrew is Yeshua, which is Jesus. When our new leader is on the scene,
who's texted me?
Excuse me. When our new leader is on the scene, we cannot make a treaty with the old wineskins. The old leaven of the Pharisees. Jesus said in, where is it? I wrote it down here. In Luke 12, Jesus talked about the leaven of the Pharisees. The teachings of the Pharisees that were a part of an old system, that they were not to make a treaty with them. I have to believe that when Jesus was talking about these things, the leaven of the Pharisees, the new wine into the old wineskins, that he was reminding them of the spirit of the Gibeonites, in which Israel made a mistake and made a treaty in the new land with their new leader. They made a treaty with the old, and it ended up proving to be problematic for them the rest of the days of their life. Yes, they made those Gibeonites water carriers and woodcutters. They became servants of them. That's understood. But this old wine skin, this old model, is not to have a treaty be made with. You can't make a treaty with the old and prophetically continue to advance into the new. You can't do it. You have to. And if you have to keep going back to Gilgal, did you notice their camp remained at Gilgal, the place of consecration? They kept going back to Gilgal. They would go into Jericho, then they'd go back to Gilgal. They would defeat Ai, and then they would go back to Gilgal. Now they're encountering the Gibeonites. Go back to your Gilgal. You do not want to make a treaty with the Gibeonites. It's a spirit of deception. Here's what Brian Simmons says in the Passion Translation footnotes related to Joshua 9:13, which totally confirmed what the Lord spoke to me. The Gibeonites with old wineskins, and he puts in parentheses religious systems, old clothing, parentheses, old nature, old worn out shoes, parentheses, old methods, and moldy bread represent counterfeit traditions and deceptions of religion. You cannot continue to advance in the promised land and make a treaty with the Gibeonites. You can't do it. You cannot do it. Jesus said it in Mark 2, and I want you to listen to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5. It says, "Do you not know a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Therefore purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you are truly unleavened. For indeed Christ our Passover was sacrificed for us. Therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." My friends, the old religious system, the old institutions of church, the old doctrines of men and doctrines of demons are rooted in deception, and they are tenacious in their pursuit for those that are in the promised land and are advancing by faith, not by sight. The mistake that Joshua and the Israelites made here is that they failed to consult with Yahweh. They tasted the wine. They tasted the bread. They saw the old wineskins. They saw the old sandals. They saw what they had brought. But it was a ruse. It was a deception. And I am here to warn you that in the promised land, one of the giant nations are the Gibeonites. The old religious system, the old religious guard that will not give up control. They didn't give up control in Jesus' day, so don't think they're going to give up control in our day. That's why we have to beware of the spirit of the Gibeonites, because that spirit was in the promised land, and it has no intention of going anywhere. So you and I are going to have to make a conscious choice not to make a treaty with them, not to come into alignment with them, not to allow that spirit of the old wineskin, the old bread, the old sandal, or the old garments to align with all that God is doing new. Do you understand now, in closing, why God spoke to Joshua multiple times in Joshua 1 and said, "Be strong and of good courage. Be strong and of good courage." Because they had never gone that way before. And it was imperative that they would be strong and of good courage, because they needed to be able to continue to advance in the promised land. And it was going to be a walk by faith and not by sight kind of walk. Remember, no more manna, no more water from the rock, no more Moses, one-man leader out front like the tip of the spear. I believe Joshua was an inside the camp kind of leader. He was leading from within. That's why even when they went around the walls of Jericho, they had a front guard, they had 7 priests, then they had the ark, then they had the rear guard. I believe Joshua was walking within the midst of the people, because leaders that can walk in the midst of the people are leaders that are protected by God and the people. And it's a new way, and it's a new day, but it's the same Yahweh. We must consult him so that we too do not fall prey to the spirit of the Gibeonites. It's a prophetic journey into the promised land, my friends. And God is giving a heads up on what will be in front of us. So we've got to keep advancing. And when you come up against these things, it's a speed bump. And all he wants you to do is slow down, recognize, consult him, repent, do whatever you got to do. We'll get over the speed bump and we will continue on the highway that the Lord has prepared for us in this new land that he is taking us. May the Lord bless you. May this word be rhema, life to you. And may he give you the ability to guard your heart against the spirit of the Gibeonites, because they are ruthless and relentless, and they're creating a ruse. I bless you in the name of Jesus. Until tomorrow, have a good day.